So we reached out to all 50 to see where things stand. 2/3 responded, the large majority telling us they are not where they need to be. The reasons may be surprising. Plagued at first by shortages, only 4 states say they are low on testing kits, reagents, or swabs right now, though many said they're worried about maintaining that supply. Oklahoma opened its testing up to everyone.
We saw an enormous increase in testing from right around 800 to 1,000 a day to over 4,000 a day. When that happened, we overwhelmed our testing labs.
Multiple states are sometimes competing to get tests processed at the same labs. Oklahoma had to scale back temporarily.
Is it possible right now in the state of Oklahoma for someone who is asymptomatic to go and get a test today?
Yes, it is.
Only a handful of states said they have opened up testing to everyone. The rest are prioritizing those who are sick and essential. But now that capacity has improved, some states are dealing with a different problem, like in Arkansas, where some residents don't realize tests are now more available.
Some people may not see themselves as being at risk, and other people may perceive that they are increasing their risk if they go out to get tested.
There are some health officials who remain frustrated, like in Santa Clara County, California, with a population of 2 million.
The biggest challenge is everyone agrees that testing is absolutely essential, but no one can agree on who's responsible for making sure we have testing available here in the community and beyond.
In the end, experts say the goal is not to test all 330 million Americans right now, but to have the capacity to test where it is needed.
States that are building up their capacity may not be building it up for today. They may be building it up for outbreaks that might pop up down the road.
Absolutely. And every time we see a new outbreak, we need to have the testing capacity to go in, test everybody, identify who's been infected, and isolate those people.
Health officials say they have their eyes on that goal, aware that there is still lots of work to be done. Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, New York.
Some fascinating findings there. In 60 seconds, will camp be safe for kids this summer? What the CDC is now saying. Also, my interview with an inmate the DA's office says was wrongfully convicted, but still behind bars as outbreaks explode in prisons. As the weather warms up, many families are asking, will you be able to send your child to camp this summer? Our Sam Brock on the new CDC guidance.
From tug of war to arts and crafts, camp in the age of coronavirus is now at a crossroads for 20 million kids.
It's something that they look forward to all year round. And
Sarah Newman is one of many parents deciding whether to send her boys to summer camp.
There's been talk about them testing them before they get on the bus to go to overnight camp, in which case, if everyone passes that test, then they can all just quarantine together.
Tonight, brand new guidance from the CDC doesn't address testing specifically, but does establish checks and balances for camps, which appear to have wide discretion on whether or not to open. The agency says health screenings for children and employees and following state and local orders are essential. The CDC also strongly suggesting social distancing measures, keeping kids in small groups and staggering drop-off times.
In all of my years of camping, I think this is the most important summer ever.
Jonathan Gold runs 3 day camps in New Jersey and plans on keeping them open.
You're planning on opening your camps. How are you going to do that safely?
We have to lay out all the protocols, all the safety things that we're going to do to mitigate the risk, and then let parents choose.
Other directors aren't taking that chance. Ruben Arquilovich is shutting down 15 overnight camps.
Both the known risks and the unknown risks really threatened our most sacred value, and that's the value of health and safety and life.
6 shots! A great camp debate for those trying to keep this cherished experience going.
What's your favorite part about camp, Asher?
Definitely the swimming. The pool there goes up to 8 feet.
What? That's crazy.
The hallmarks of summer hanging in the balance for many families. Sam Brock, NBC News.
A rite of summer. Criminal justice advocates are warning of what some are calling a human rights scandal. COVID infections and deaths coursing through America's prison population. Tonight, one of those at risk, a death row inmate who prosecutors stunningly admit never should have been convicted. Right now, prisons are among the worst outbreak sites. Nationwide, so far, more than 25,000 infected inmates and at least 373 deaths. Some governors even choosing to release inmates, angering victims' rights groups. But Walter Ogrod, who sits on Pennsylvania's death row, is not going anywhere.
My lungs felt like breathing through a wet sponge.
As his symptoms worsened in March, Ogrod felt like he was facing a double injustice. That's because the same DA's office that won his conviction for murder 25 years ago recently admitted they got it wrong and asked a judge to set him free.
We believe that the conviction as it stands is a gross miscarriage of justice.
Ogrod was convicted for the 1988 murder of 4-year-old Barbara Jean Horn under a previous Philadelphia DA. Even though no physical evidence or witnesses connected Ogrod to the crime, he confessed, though he then quickly recanted. But Patricia Cummings, who runs the Philadelphia District Attorney's Conviction Integrity Unit, says their investigation convinced her Ogrod was coerced by detectives and that key evidence was buried. Did your experience tell you that a confession is not always a red flag for guilt?
There is no doubt in my mind that false confessions occur.
And then, as Ogrod waited for his day in court, COVID struck his prison.
Then they put me in isolation because I had like 103-degree temperature. One guard in the nursing escorted me and says, "Congratulations, you got corona."
But Ogrod was never tested. Are there cases of COVID or sickness going around?
Oh, we got COVID right now. One prisoner died just recently.
Ogrod's supporters, which now include the victim's mother, believe he has been doubly wronged.
We're willing to admit our mistake, yet we don't act quick enough, and something happens to them from the point of reaching that conclusion to the point of actually setting them free. So it's frightening.
Ogrod is back in court in June, where a judge will decide whether to overturn his conviction or send him back to death row. Up next, as we continue this evening on the trail of COVID-19, could dogs help sniff it out in humans? In the search for solutions tonight, a potential new ally in the COVID battle. Here's NBC's Willem Marks.
We all know the amazing power of a dog's nose. Trained to detect bombs at airports, sent to search for survivors after earthquakes. And now the fight against coronavirus could get some four-legged help too, from dogs like Storm and Asher. They're part of a British charity, Medical Detection Dogs.
If they can do this reliably, it'll be a real game changer.
The hope is that COVID-19 creates a certain smell that specially trained dogs can detect on people, like they already do with malaria and some cancers.
They have 350 sensory receptors in their nose. Us poor humans have got 5 million.
They've been training dogs like Star here to detect disease for more than a decade, and if COVID-19 has a signature scent, there's a good chance she'll end up in an airport, helping find those who are infected.
And the key here is that we can screen a lot of people very quickly, and it's non-invasive.
They hope to know if the disease can be sniffed out by July, allowing these dogs to become the new furry detectives on the front lines. Willem Marks, NBC News, Milton Keynes, England.
Up next, the family that found a safe way to hug grandma.
NBC Nightly News is brought to you by CFP Professionals. A confident financial plan is possible with a CFP professional.
We wanted to leave you tonight with scenes of hope, starting with this family in Rockford, Illinois, that built a hug guard so that 85-year-old great-grandma Rose can hug her grandkids safely. And in New Jersey, COVID-19 was no match for 108-year-old Sylvia Goldshaw. She lived through the 1918 flu pandemic, and now she's one of the oldest survivors of coronavirus. And this celebration in Illinois, 4-year-old Amelia getting a cheering send-off after battling that mystery syndrome. She's headed home just in time to celebrate her 5th birthday. Happy birthday, Amelia. That's Nightly News for this Friday. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night.
Living in New York City, I'm reporting from one of the epicenters of the coronavirus pandemic. While around the world, my NBC News colleagues are on the ground, uncovering the biggest stories of the week about how life is changing for us all. From Germany to Hong Kong, here is some of what we've seen. In this week's show, Caged, tasered and tear-gassed, we investigate the disturbing ways lockdown is being enforced. Iran after the outbreak, our correspondent is back on the streets of Tehran. From cardboard partitions to glass houses, it's the return of the restaurant. And extreme social distancing. The two scientists stuck indefinitely in the Arctic.
This week started out with optimistic plans to lift restrictions and loosen lockdown. But as the week wore on, these plans looked increasingly like a series of false starts.
Here's how our correspondents reported on the twists and the turns.
People will be allowed outside for longer. There'll be no limit on how long people are allowed to exercise outside. They'll also be allowed to sunbathe, provided that it is socially distanced, and meet a person from one other household. Many people I spoke to said, what exactly does stay alert mean? What's the behaviour behind that? And the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, said today that this roadmap essentially throws up more questions than it gives answers.
Shanghai Disney is getting attention because it's the first in the world to reopen after closing down at the height of the virus outbreak here in China. It doesn't mean it was a free-for-all. Tickets are advance booking only. They're very limited because China's government has capped capacity at 30%. That's roughly 24,000 visitors per day. So there are very high expectations that this could be a sign of better days ahead for parks in the U.S. as well.
Now, like all big cities, Paris has a lot of big practical challenges ahead, including education. Now, students in Paris go back to school on Thursday, and the city is literally hand-picking the students to go back first from the most vulnerable households and those of essential workers.
Since about a week now, the country has been rapidly lifting some of these lockdown restrictions. Things like shopping malls, places of worship, hairdressers, and restaurants now beginning to reopen across the country. But that's with a backdrop of some worrying numbers coming in. First, over the weekend, the reproduction numbers spiking into dangerous territory for 3 days in a row. That's a measurement of how easily the virus is spreading. Then just yesterday, new daily cases of the coronavirus nearly tripling.
Here in New York City, the idea of restaurants reopening again still feels like a long way off. As you see the ones behind me, they are only open for takeout or delivery, but that is not the case for restaurants around the world. They are starting to reopen, and Tessa Arcia reports on some pretty extreme solutions in Amsterdam. But first, Justin Solomon takes a look at Hong Kong's latest dining accessory, a piece of cardboard.
As life begins to get back to normal, or at least the new normal here in Hong Kong, restaurants are adapting to it. One rule in place, only 8 people per table maximum, and those tables need to be about 5 feet or 1.5 meters apart. And other restaurants have taken it a step further, installing these cardboard dividers between tables as a way to reduce exposure between customers, giving diners an added sense of safety.
Where there's a will and a lot of creativity, there is a way. This restaurant has reimagined what dining out in a post-lockdown world would look like. Basically, dinner for 2 inside a tiny greenhouse with servers in face shields and gloves, and food served on a wooden plank to ensure that diners remember to keep their distance.
It's really cozy and nice, and the food is delicious.
Yeah, it's fun to reconnect with each other.
Now, even in a country that coined the term intelligent lockdown, with a lot less rigorous enforcement of the rules, bars, cafes, and restaurants have had to close their doors. And when they do reopen sometime in June, they will have to keep social distancing at the heart of their operations. I spoke to a representative of the city of Amsterdam, and she said they will be enforcing those rules. Now, the owner of the restaurant told me that people better start getting creative because this new normal is here to stay.
There's still a lot of learning for us. In these new typologies, like how can we do our practice and reinvent it.
And starting today, this restaurant/art space is going to be offering up the place for funeral services. Now, I asked him what he thought of people copying his ideas, and he said, please go ahead. Tessa Arcia, NBC News, Amsterdam.
Now, Greece may have been praised for its handling of COVID-19, but its fragile economy is back in crisis.
I spoke to left-wing former finance minister Yanis Varoufakis. First of all, I asked him what he thought of his country's plans to reopen the country to foreign tourists.
Well, it's wishful thinking more than a plan, because to have a plan, you need to have airlines that are functioning. You need to have tourists willing to travel. You need to have even a rudimentary system for dealing with an upsurge in infections. Look, this is a country that has more or less a monoculture of an industry. Tourism accounts for up to 30-35% of our GDP. So what is a calamity is about to turn into a catastrophe from the economic pandemic point of view. And I can understand why the government is making all these noises about being open to tourism, but I just don't think that this is going to be the reality this summer.
I'm fascinated to get your take. As we mentioned, you sort of are a progressive icon, certainly I think both in the United States and over Europe. You roll your eyes, but Yanis, you've created this with a motorbike and a leather jacket. This is of your own doing. So, I want to ask you, here in the United States, we sort of saw the progressive flank being essentially sort of once again flaring up, looking like it had a chance, and then now sort of the more moderate side of Joe Biden has won out. Bernie Sanders failed to secure the Democratic nomination. Do you see the left-wing progressive movement as being in crisis?
Permanently. The left has always been in crisis because we've been very good at effectively undermining our own agendas. Not just the left, even the soft left. Look at the Democrats in the United States. Has there been a greatest enemy to the Democratic Party than the Democratic Party itself? Look at the Labour Party in Britain. Disunity has been a given when it comes to progressive politics. This is why we need to overcome this. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party is now saddled with a quasi-incompetent nominee, Joe Biden. I don't think he's up to the task of defeating.
Do you think he's going to? Do you think he could win? Are you confident that he will defeat Donald Trump in November?
Well, Donald Trump is doing his best to lose the election over the last few weeks. We've been watching that. But then again, Joe Biden never ceases to miss an opportunity to impress the American public. If he wins, it will be by default. But the question is, what does he do when he moves to the White House? He is not a proponent of Medicare for all. He is a proponent of business as usual, the kind of business that could not continue as usual, not since 2008, and the kind of politician who, by pursuing these business as usual, pro-Wall Street, pro-big business policies, cultivated the ground for somebody like Donald Trump to enter the White House. Is he the solution to a problem that his ilk created? I fear not.
We're all currently being encouraged to find a socially distanced way to commute. Do you think that we should all be motorcyclists now? Is that the way forward?
I always was. Look, the reason why I still ride a motorcycle, I'm pushing 60 now, is because I have to admit that every time I get on it, I feel like I'm a 15-year-old, full of excitement about something physical. And, at my age, I don't feel that very often about many things.
Coming up, Mulan actor Ty Ma's recent painful face-to-face with racism.
I just felt that the violation was so violent that I feel like the blood in my body was drained from me.
Welcome back. Now, the coronavirus pandemic has brought with it a sea of racism and xenophobia, much of it directed towards Asian Americans. I spoke with Hollywood actor Ty Ma about his very personal experience.
I was on my way to the grocery store to pick up some provisions, and there was this car that kind of was pulling up alongside of me, and I thought he was being very kind to allow me to pass and then go away. However, he didn't do that. He slowed down. While he was slowing down, he rolled down his window stopped in front of me and looked me straight in the eye and said, "You should be quarantined," and took off. And I was classed with it. Completely. Yeah, it was surreal. And I thought, this is my neighborhood. This is where I live. So that was a shock to me. I wasn't in a strange place. So after he left, I just felt that the violation was so violent that my body, I feel like the blood in my body was drained from me. And then the anger flushed in. And I just started screaming at this empty space because he's gone already. So I hope I run into him again.
What would what would you do if you did see him again?
I really like to have a conversation with this young man. Really, given his age, I think he needs a little bit of guidance. I think he's been misled.
I mean, just yesterday, for example, we saw an Asian American reporter ask President Trump a question. He told her to, quote, ask China. I mean, it left her obviously shocked. I mean, what did you make of that exchange?
Well, unfortunately, our leadership is so irresponsible in the words they use, and we know that there's a motive behind what he said. And really, he really wants to kind of place blame, to create an atmosphere so that he can be reelected. So there is nothing about this man that has any compassion to people, to really, everything he says is self-serving, and we are a good target for him. So
I mean, and he tweeted out this morning, Ty, I would love to get your response to this. He's tweeted, Asian Americans are very angry at what China has done to our country and the world. Chinese Americans are the most angry of all. I don't blame them. I mean, what do you say to the president?
He's a liar. He just makes stuff up as it goes. We're not angry at China. We're angry at him. We're angry at all the rhetoric. We're angry at all the rhetoric that he is spewing out and giving people license, to enact violence, to abuse. We're not alone in terms of all the hatred that's happening in the United States. It is a global phenomenon here. Things are happening in Canada, Australia, Europe. I think we really need some kind of a message, some kind of message of unity.
Are some governments using the coronavirus pandemic to extend their powers and enforce lockdown in increasingly humiliating and brutal ways? NBC's verification unit has investigated 3 shocking clips.
As the world responds to the coronavirus outbreak, some countries are using brutal tactics to enforce lockdowns. That prompted the UN to issue a warning that the pandemic should not be a pretext for repressive measures. I'm Raf Sanchez from the NBC News Verification Unit. Our team has verified videos and images of worrying incidents in 3 countries where harsh and humiliating tactics have been used to keep people at home. We contacted people involved, and this is our investigation. In the Philippines, we tracked this picture back to a local official's Facebook page. We asked, why had he forced the group into animal cages for breaking the rules? He simply replied with a thumbs up. Local police confirmed to our unit that he's being investigated, but is still allowed to work in the meantime. Our unit also traced back this footage, which shows officials locking a teenager in a coffin, apparently for an hour, as punishment for ignoring the curfew rules. It was originally posted by an official to his personal social media page, but has since been deleted. Human Rights Watch raised the alarm over these videos and said it's not uncommon for local officials to publicize what they're doing.
These officials are so brazen that they're putting it on their own Facebook pages. They're showing these things off that, hey, I'm such a tough guy. Hey, I'm someone who can't be messed with. No, look what I've done here. And, it's not even hiding it. I mean, that shows the level of impunity that we're worried about.
And why would they hide it? They seem to have the blessing of the country's president.
I will not hesitate. My orders are sa police pati military. Shoot them dead.
When you have President Duterte saying very clearly at the outset that any sort of curfew violator, if they resisted, they could be shot, indicates to the local officials that they are not going to face any sort of accountability for what they do.
It's not just the Philippines. We've also found evidence of similar tactics in Paraguay. This footage of a man being intimidated with a taser and forced to do jumping jacks was sent to us by a local government body tasked with investigating the police. And in another video, shared on social media, police are on a motorbike harassing someone during curfew hours. A spokesperson for the police confirmed to us that the footage was filmed by its officers and that they've been disciplined internally. Finally to Kenya, where authorities are investigating 20 deaths linked to the police implementing curfew restrictions. Security forces have shut roads using water cannon and tear gas. Our unit found at least one case of a medical team being caught up in a roadblock. Circumstances are unclear, but Dr. Arnold Mallet, who was there, told us that they felt deliberately targeted by police.
Specifically, doctors were just being told to wait, to stop. So I felt like it's an onslaught on all the doctors, on the medical workers. Why would you stop a doctor from accessing their place of work? Yet the president had categorically stated that the medical doctors, the healthcare workers, are part of the essential service. They should not be denied access to work. If anything, how will you run the hospitals if you're not at work?
After the incident, a union representing Kenyan health workers accused the police of harassing them, even after they'd showed their ID cards. Coronavirus lockdowns are likely to be in place for weeks to come, and we'll be on the lookout for other examples of governments using repressive measures to enforce them.
Now, they've sniffed out malaria and cancer, but could dogs detect coronavirus in people with no symptoms? Willem Marks reports.
For centuries, doctors have known that specific diseases give off a certain smell. And over the past couple of decades, there's been a significant body of academic research showing that dogs are particularly adept at identifying those scents. They've got hundreds of millions of sensory receptors in their noses. We have just 5 or 6 million in ours. If you were to drop a teaspoon of some substance into the amount of water that would fill 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, a dog could identify it. And that's why they're being trained to decide whether COVID-19 has a specific scent associated with it, and then if it does, to distinguish that scent from all of the other smells you might encounter in a big transportation hub like an airport. We had a chance to talk to one of the scientists involved in this endeavour, Professor James Logan from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and I asked him why these COVID-sniffing dogs might prove useful.
The key here is that we can screen a lot of people very quickly, and it's non-invasive, so we don't need to take a sample from the mouth or blood or anything like that, and the dogs would be able to detect this from people who are passing through. So if you imagine a dog in an airport that's looking at detecting drugs and explosives, walking down a line, it would be the same sort of method, and each individual dog could screen up to 250 people per hour, so we could get through a lot of people very, very quickly.
Now, of course, it's early days here during this trial, but it could be that by the end of summer, after 2 or 3 months of clinical trials and training for the dogs, that this proof of concept could be adopted by Heathrow Airport here in London and then potentially rolled out to many other countries around the world. Willem Marks, NBC News, Milton Keynes.
Coming up, the ultimate social distancing. We talk to the 2 scientists trapped on their own in the Arctic. Welcome back. Now, the incredible story of 2 scientists who signed up to spend just the winter in the Arctic But then coronavirus hit. Helena Humphrey reports.
When it comes to social distancing, it doesn't get more extreme than this. The Arctic, where 2 citizen scientists are stranded during the coronavirus pandemic.
This is tiny living at its best, 20 square meters of space that we've been in for over 8 months.
Sunniva Sorby and Hilda Fallum-Strom have been living in this whaler's hut since last August. And it's basic.
We haven't had a shower in 8 months. That's because there's no running water.
Global travel restrictions mean they've missed their ride home, scheduled for last week. Now they have no idea when they'll be able to return, and it's a case of survival. They're having to ration food. Dressing to go outside is a 15-minute affair and comes complete with a rifle. They've had several close encounters.
Oh my God.
With curious neighbours.
These have really thick nails on them, and it's designed to keep the polar bears from both climbing the roof and also getting in the window.
They admit times have been tough.
We had tears and we had disappointment, as I'm sure the rest of the world had during these days.
But their work keeps them going, breaking the elements to collect environmental data, even working with NASA. And they're seeing the bright side.
We gave up what we thought was our normal life to come here. And as it turns out, this is more normal than the life back home.
And until nature decides otherwise, these hostile but beautiful surroundings will continue to be Hilda and Sunniva's home for the foreseeable future.
Iran was one of the first countries to be devastated by coronavirus, and its regime has faced criticism over its handling of the crisis. Now it's reopened, and NBC's Ali Arouzi has returned. I've got some family there, and I was really curious to hear his first impressions, starting from the moment he stepped off the plane. I said I haven't been back in a long time, over 20 years, but my memories are, when you came out of the tussle of the airport in Tehran, there would be people outside, it would be just a throng of people, kissing, hugging, wanting to, grab you and put you in the car and get you home as quickly as possible to start feeding you, which was definitely my grandparents' MO. But what's that been like? I mean, is it the same Tehran that I'm remembering?
Look, I mean, Tehran is always like that. I mean, that's a very accurate description of coming out of the airport. I mean, you feel like a sports star coming out of the baggage hall. There's so many people there standing there with flowers and cheering, but this was a sort of a milder version of that. Like I said, people weren't really socially distancing. People were shoulder to shoulder, but because there were so few flights coming in, the number of people there were much less. It was a milder version of what you had described.
In terms of the local centres of power, the mosques, the bazaars, have these been open throughout the pandemic? Are they starting to open again now? What's the situation?
It's been a sort of a stop-start approach with them. At the peak of the pandemic, sort of mid-February to mid-March, they'd closed a lot of them down because it seemed to be spreading out of control here. I mean, you remember all the footage of the deputy minister of health, coughing and spluttering away at a press conference for coronavirus. The number of MPs that caught it, I think it really spooked people here. So, and then you have these, this weird footage of people going and licking the mosque door to say that they weren't afraid of coronavirus, and it did start to spread quite rapidly when those numbers of people were out and not taking precautions. So they shut them all down for a good month. I mean, in end of February, beginning of March, it's the first time since the revolution in 1979 that there weren't Friday prayers in Tehran. But these are all starting to open up again. The mosques, the malls, the bazaars are all open now. They are holding prayer services for Ramadan. So yeah, they are opening up all of this stuff again. It is very much business as usual.
What do you think the biggest impact is going to be on Iran when we're through the other side of this?
Certainly it's going to be economic. I mean, the economy was in tatters before this pandemic. It's a combination of the sanctions, of mismanagement, of corruption. All of this had torn the economy to pieces here. And now this pandemic has made it so much worse because so many businesses have closed down, so many people were unable to work. That's going to have a big effect on the country, and it's going to have an effect on the elections here next year. They've lost a lot of confidence in the ruling system here. The big question is there going to be huge voting apathy in elections about this time next year?
Now this weekend, those who've been desperate for a taste of sport will be looking to Germany for a glimpse into the future. The Bundesliga, Germany's soccer league, will be hosting 6 matches. Here's Carl Nassmann with a report.
Are you ready for some foosball? It's been nearly 2 months since we've had major US sports to keep us entertained, but now the Bundesliga, Germany's top soccer league, has been given the green light to kick off once again, likely becoming the first major sports league to reopen during the pandemic. But how exactly is this going to work? To keep players safe, the league is implementing several measures. The most important of those will be regular testing of players and staff. They're going to need tens of thousands of tests to do that. Of course, strict hygiene and distancing measures will also be in effect, so teams will be arriving and leaving from stadiums at different times. There'll be no more handshakes, no more team photos. Even press conferences are going to be virtual. And this is what stadiums will look like. No fans allowed inside. In fact, Germans, they've got the perfect word for this: Geisterspiele, or ghost games. There are risks involved. Some players are concerned after a dozen or so players and coaches tested positive this week for COVID-19. So could this be a blueprint for American sports?
All of the sports leagues are going to learn from each other. Each sport is a little bit difficult. Obviously, it's much easier to play something like golf than to play something that has contact involved in it, and something that relies on fans versus something that doesn't rely on fans. But I do think it will be important for all the professional leagues in the world to learn from each other and come up with best practices that they can apply.
So you can bet there'll be more than just German soccer fans watching the Bundesliga as games get back underway.
And Carl will have an update for us on how those matches went next week. And as more states and countries start to lift restrictions, we'll be reporting on whether people are ready to go back to business as usual. Until next time.
Graduation ceremonies might be canceled, but the stars are coming together to celebrate America's graduates with a commencement speech by President Barack Obama. Class of 2020. Let's graduate together. Tomorrow at 8 on NBC News Now.
We're moving into uncharted territory, a gut check in our battle with the coronavirus, the enormous challenge of reopening the country.
Stadiums will likely be empty until next year.
More antibody testing sites are popping up.
NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
Expect to see more cases across the United States.
It's news made for your streaming world. Live weekdays starting at 6 a.m. Eastern.
Today, the World Health Organization officially calling it a pandemic. None of us is unaffected by its impact.
Coming in November, people are going to be voting for stability.
I have to plan a funeral. How is this going to work?
You don't prepare for giving birth in a pandemic.
The importance of music is to keep our spirits up.
I'm Tremaine Lee. Join me as we go into America to hear from everyday people grappling with the issues of our time.
This country was forged in part by shared sacrifice, and once again, we're called to step up. We hope you'll continue to stay informed and stay engaged as we follow this journey together. I'm Lester Holt, and for all my colleagues at NBC News, take care.
If it's asking the tough questions.
Would you prefer a 14-day national shutdown?
If it's asking for accountability.
Respirators and ventilators. Has the federal government stepped up enough?
If it's navigating the new normal in America. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
A pandemic that has turned our world upside down. The story changes hourly. More states are doing a slow rollout, lifting those stay-at-home orders, even with less than 2% of our nation tested. It's the 11th hour.
Here in Los Angeles, protesters are rallying against supermarket giant Kroger's decision to end hero pay for workers. The country's biggest grocery store is no longer paying its employees an extra $2 an hour while working on the front lines. NBC News' business and tech correspondent Jolene Kent joins me now. Joe, I know that the whole principle of this couple extra dollars was a big deal when they said they'd be giving it to workers. Now, even though we're seeing more cases of COVID-19 here, it's being taken away. What are workers saying?
Workers are very unhappy. The workers we've spoken to, including a woman who's a sales manager. She works the checkout. She's been working there for over a decade down in Torrance, California. She says that it makes a difference because nothing is changing on the public health side of things, and yet their compensation is going to go back down. Listen to this.
They just trying to save $1, in my opinion. They're making more than enough, and I feel like they should be able, they can afford to give it to us. They just want us to work at our normal business, and it's not normal business yet.
Now, the point she also made to me there at the protest is that, look, we're still wearing masks and protective gear. We've got the plexiglass up in front of us. The pandemic has not been downshifted, so to speak, and so why would the pay go away? Well, the pressure on Kroger is certainly making some sort of change happen here. They are continuing not to extend the hazard pay past this Sunday, but Kroger just now telling us they will now be issuing hero bonuses for over a 4-week period of time. If you're a full-time employee, that will total $400 or $800 total over a month. And if you're a part-time worker, that will be $400. So they are rolling out some new ways of compensation. But again, that is a temporary measure as public health officials expect the coronavirus pandemic to continue for months to come.
Good to know. It seems like these days we see our grocery store workers more often than we see our actual families. I know that Kroger's isn't the only big chain who was paying this type of hazard pay. Are there any other big chains like this that are ending their programs?
Yeah, we expect Amazon, Target, and Walmart all to end their extra few dollars an hour of hero or hazard pay by the end of this month. And Amazon is responding, saying they're investing in other ways to give workers more safety and precautions on the job. You'll remember that Jeff Bezos in the last earnings report for Amazon saying that he's going to be turning a lot of that profit back into the company specifically for COVID-19. But as for those few extra dollars an hour, we expect many of these big names to roll it back by the end of this month.
And Joe, while we're talking about the consumer spending, we just saw retail sales come in. I was following some of your tweets. They look absolutely dismal. What does this mean for the next few months?
Yeah, it's not good for the economy because, as you know, consumer spending drives most of the economy, the majority of it. And so when you look at the numbers here, I just want to run through a couple of them. You saw retail and food services plunge overall by 16.4% last month. That's the most ever on record. If you dig further into the report, you see that the consumer spending on clothing and accessory stores dropped 90%, 90, compared to last year at the same exact time. Then I also was looking at Fed data that just came out this morning as well on factory output, and that tanked more than 10%. That's the worst in a century. And so as we gather all of these data points, it's hard to imagine a quick bounce back because you take all of that and then you compare it to the 36-some million jobless claims that have been filed in the past 8 weeks. And it's very hard to imagine just a completely reopening of the economy in a super fast way, right? So the numbers today, that retail spending number, not a lot of people always look at it, but now in this economic crisis, it's more important than ever, Gadi.
Joe, you are such a must-follow on Twitter for all things economy and tech. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You too.
More than 100 colleges and universities have made the SAT optional for the next school year because of the pandemic, and that includes the entire University of California school system, who might end up doing away with the tests forever. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton is covering this story for the Report on Quibi. It's a show produced by NBC News. Antonia, colleges and universities have been thinking about ditching this requirement for these tests for quite a while now. Can you remind us why?
That's right. I mean, the debate over the fairness of these tests, the SAT and ACT, that's been a raging debate for decades, arguably, but it's really been heating up the last several years. And it breaks down into two camps. So you have educators and administrators who argue that these test scores are really helpful indicators of how a student is going to perform, of how they're going to do on campus. It gives you a full picture of their academic performance. And then you have educators and advocates who argue, actually, these test scores mostly just tell us whose parents have the most money to pay for test prep. And that was, of course, a conversation that came up in 2019 when the Varsity Blues cheating scandal happened. And so it's really rocked California, and the UC system was debating this prior to the pandemic. And now the pandemic has really kicked this debate into high gear.
We've seen some students preparing for this throughout their entire high school careers. What kind of impact will this have for prospective students, and what does this mean for them?
So the SATs and ACTs, it's no secret that it's always been very stressful for students who see this next step for them after graduating from high school, of course, as critical. And the students who we focus on for this upcoming report are students who are low income, of color, maybe English was their second language. And for them, accessing test prep, their parents may not have the money for that. They may never even be able to dream of getting a fancy tutor. And so they're watching classmates or people they know around them, in this case, in the state of California, go to these things, access these things, their parents set them up for them. And that adds a layer of anxiety that, for them makes some of these schools feel almost completely just unattainable. And now add the pandemic to that, and you look at low-income kids who are living in tight quarters at home. Their parents may have lost work, and all of those things I just described are exacerbated. And that's the case for Haley, a student who I spoke to who's in the Santa Ana area in California.
For 4.0 student Haley Gomez Wagner, a lot was riding on this. She's from a lower income family in the Santa Ana area, and she wants to get into UCLA, the most sought after campus in the University of California system. The day after we visited Haley's class, she found out that the SATs were canceled due to the pandemic.
It's really different. Last semester, it was, let's prepare for the SAT, let's get ready. It's going to be the biggest test ever. And then now it's like, are we even going to be able to take it in person?
Because of the countrywide shutdown, more than 100 colleges and universities, UCLA included, have made standardized tests optional for the 2021 school year.
So all eyes are really on this right now in California. There's a critical vote coming up on May 21st, which is just a couple days away. And the UC system is going to decide, in the midst of this pandemic, a lot of colleges and universities have decided these tests aren't essential right now. Are they actually going to ever be essential again?
It's so hard to state how massive that UC school system is. If they ditch this requirement, is there a sense that other schools might follow?
Absolutely. I mean, educators and activists around the country are going to be watching this historic Zoom meeting that's happening in just a couple days. Look, the UC system is considered one of, if not the most prestigious public college system in the country. And they have been leaders on everything in education, really. They were actually one of the early adopters of these high stakes tests. And back then, all these colleges and universities copied them. So there's a lot of anticipation, a lot of expectation that if they decide, hey, actually, we don't need these things anymore. We've filled up a wonderful class for the 2021 school year, and these test scores made no difference, didn't help us at all. And they decide, well, then we're never going to use them again. People expect it to be like an avalanche. If the UC system does it, they don't think these are essential, then why should we?
It's going to be so interesting to see how this develops. Thanks so much, Antonia.
Thank you for having me.
And you can watch Antonia's full report, the full story on The Report. That's by NBC News. Just download the Quibi app. And former Trump chairman Paul Manafort is now at home serving the rest of his prison sentence from his house. He was released earlier after his lawyer cited coronavirus concerns, but that is not an option for every inmate. And activists warn prisons could become incubators for the virus. NBC News' correspondent Tremaine Lee joins me now from Sullivan County, New York. Tremaine, one Sullivan County jail was placed on lockdown earlier this week because of a coronavirus scare there. Can you tell us what happened?
That's right, Gotti. As coronavirus continues to spread across the country and prisons and jails become hotspots, there are a number of them who have so far avoided the nightmare scenario that we've seen time and again. Sullivan County Jail just got its first confirmed case of COVID-19 in the inmate population this week. Now, in recent weeks, they've had 4 staff members also test positive, but we're only about 2.5 hours away from New York City, and the New York City jail system has been ravaged like so many others across the country. So this jail is bracing, hopefully, to guard against the coronavirus. But once the virus, COVID-19, gets into these prison walls, it's really bad. It ravages them completely, Gotti.
Yeah, and it seems like it's not just there. It seems like these days the biggest hotspots are always meatpacking facilities, nursing homes, and prisons. What's going on around the rest of the country?
Oh, you gotta, that's the truth. You know, prisons and jails have become the hottest of the hotspots when it comes to COVID-19. Now, let's keep in mind just the vastness of the American prison system. There are over 2.3 million people currently incarcerated in the jails and also prisons. And so far, 70% of federal inmates who've been tested have come up positive for COVID-19. Now, when you take account of the city and state prison systems, you're talking about another nearly 10,000 inmates. Now, I've been getting DMs and emails from inmates and their families, also some video diaries from folks, and they, quite frankly, feel like they've been left to die. And so you have to imagine that the vast majority of people in the prison system are there for nonviolent offenses. And so in so many ways, they're trapped behind walls. They're many times in congregate housing. There's no possible way to socially distance yourself from anyone else. And it feels like a death sentence, Gotti.
Hey, going back to Paul Manafort's release, we were under the impression that he technically wasn't eligible for early release because he had not yet served half of his sentence. So how does the Justice Department decide who gets in and who doesn't, and who's able to be released?
Gotti, that's a great question. As you know, there are people mobilizing and organizers and activists all across the country advocating on behalf of your everyday inmate. Now, Paul Manafort has gotten out. He didn't necessarily fit the bill. AG Barr, Attorney General Bill Barr, ordered the Bureau of Prisons to look at a way to release some prisoners who were either, very vulnerable in terms of their age or their health, or also those who are serving time in facilities that have been highly impacted. Now, while no one at the Pennsylvania prison where Paul Manafort was being held got COVID-19, he did get sick in January and February with the flu. But that is the big question. While there are so many, especially nonviolent offenders out there, very vulnerable all across the country, many of them are pushing and struggling to get out. But Paul Manafort, a good friend of the president and the administration, gets out early, has a lot of people scratching their heads, Gotti.
Wow. And here in L.A., the county released something like 5,000 people before things really started getting bad. We've seen in Chicago, rapper and activist Common is pushing for more inmate releases. He's got a push right now called We Matter Too. Let's play a little bit of his video.
If it comes in here, it's going to spread like wildfire because everything's confined. You have 4-man cells, 6-man cells.
Our bunks are on top of each other. The cells are very small. The showers, they either get cleaned once a day or sometimes they don't get cleaned at all.
Everybody's still playing cards. The phones are like not even 2 feet from each other, so it's not like everybody's really separated.
They don't supply us with no gloves or anything. As of antibacterial soap and stuff like that, there's none of that available.
Tremaine, can you tell us a little bit more about this campaign? Do you think this is going to work?
I mean, part of the mission for this campaign is to illustrate the very dire circumstances that so many folks find themselves in behind bars. Now, to a lot of people, you know, you've been incarcerated, you've been convicted, you're a throwaway. But these are people's nephews, their sons, their spouses. And so the effort of Common and so many other people around the country who are pushing is to say, let's not forget that they are humans and that we matter too came from a sign from an inmate at Cook County's jail who held the sign and said, we matter too. So the effort here is to try to organize high-profile individuals, people with some sort of power and celebrity, to put pressure on their local policymakers and on the administration. Let's not forget how Kim Kardashian West has been able to, you know, get the ear of the White House and actually made some things happen. So the effort here is to really put pressure on the policymakers who may be able to take some action before it's too late, because right now, it's pretty bad across the country, Gotti.
So important to remember. Thanks so much, Tremaine.
Thank you.
Some interesting news down south as Mexico has a bigger population than the UK, but the country there has fewer confirmed cases of COVID-19. And there are some concerns right now that more people than previously thought are infected, but have avoided going to the hospital because of the stigma associated with the disease. Sky News Chief Correspondent Stuart Ramsey has that story.
Mexico's city is absolutely vast. Unofficially, over 30 million people live here. Its boroughs would be cities in their own right anywhere else in the world. But it's dreadfully poor. People live cheek by jowl. They need work to get cash to eat, and there's little social distancing. It's a lethal COVID-19 mix. Council workers try to encourage people to sanitize their hands on a street corner in Iztapalapa, one of the worst hit areas in the city. They have some success. The point is, this is a lockdown. I couldn't even cross the road. Despite government denials, the medical profession here says the disease is spreading out of control. In some parts of Mexico, people don't think of going to hospital despite being ill. They come to small clinics, and often when it's too late. Dr. Juan Lira's surgery really is the front line. In his own PPE and visor from a DIY shop, he offers the only help these people will likely see. He says patients have died here, already too far gone for intensive care. He, like all the community doctors, are dealing with this pandemic as best they can. He says he's scared, but he's no choice but to keep working.
Pudiera ser que empiece a la curva a disminuir, pero a lo mejor se va otra vez a disparar, porque no hay conciencia. La gente aquí no tiene conciencia. Incluso mucha gente no cree que exista. Aquí los pacientes que vienen y yo les digo, probable COVID, no, eso no existe, no, eso es del gobierno.
Less than 20 meters from the clinic's front door, a huge open market is in full swing. People aren't taking the virus seriously, and there's a social stigma to being infected, so people don't admit it anyway. This stall owner says he knows of 20 market traders in this one market who have died. Ignorance and denial are a dangerous mix.
No, mucha gente no lo entiende todavía. Está la gente, hay uno que no cree nada, otros piensan que es un problema político, comercial, mundial. Pero realmente sí ha habido muchos descensos.
What we have seen is a failure of the government to impose a lockdown here, and people living in poverty-riddled communities who can't afford to stay indoors. Dr. Lira says the only way his community will get through this is if they have already built up natural immunity to disease. That's what he hopes, at least. But that's not a lot to go on.
Graduation ceremonies might be canceled, but the stars are coming together to celebrate America's graduates with a commencement speech by President Barack Obama. Class of 2020. Let's graduate together. Tomorrow at 8 on NBC News Now.
If it's asking the tough questions,
would you prefer a 14-day national shutdown?
If it's asking for accountability, respirators and ventilators, has the federal government stepped up enough? If it's navigating the new normal in America, and if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
This country was forged in part by shared sacrifice, and once again, we're called to step up. We hope you'll continue to stay informed and stay engaged as we follow this journey together. I'm Lester Holt, and for all my colleagues at NBC News, take care.
You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
Expect to see more cases across the United States.
It's news made for your streaming world. Live weekdays starting at 6 a.m. Eastern.
Pandemic that has turned our world upside down. The story changes hourly. More states are doing a slow rollout, lifting those stay-at-home orders, even with less than 2% of our nation tested. It's the 11th hour.
We're moving into uncharted territory. A gut check in our battle with the coronavirus, the enormous challenge of reopening the country.
Stadiums will likely be empty until next year.
More antibody testing sites are popping up.
NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
French citizens are raising concerns about how racial inequalities in how their lockdown restrictions were enforced. NBC News global correspondent Helena Humphrey reports.
Unrest on the streets of France. These are scenes from the past few weeks under lockdown. Accusations of police brutality and racism have reignited long-standing tensions between officers and residents in some of the country's poorest suburbs, seeing them spill over into violence. Lockdown was eased this week. Now experts are looking into how it was enforced. Some say checks carried out by police to ensure people were sticking to the rules appeared discriminatory and abusive. Jean-Auriel Agbalika says he was stopped by police while standing outside his young son's home. He says he was pushed to the ground, racially insulted and cuffed around his ankle.
For black men, that bring memories of oppression of slaves, of stuff like that.
He was left feeling crushed and has filed a complaint. But he's most worried about the effect it's had on his 2-year-old son, who witnessed what happened.
He's very traumatized about it. He just grabbed me very, very strongly and start to cry, and he repeats, "Papa, j'ai peur," like, "Papa, I'm afraid, Papa, I'm afraid."
The French police declined to comment on the specific allegations or the existence of racism within its ranks. But Christophe Querelle, an officer of 20 years who founded an association to facilitate dialogue between law enforcement and citizens, says there are issues.
Il est présent dans la police comme il est présent dans toute la société. Et c'est quelque chose, je l'ai effectivement dit clairement, c'est quelque chose qui n'a rien à faire dans la police.
Reports of racist incidents make their way to Lana Hollow on a daily basis.
There's very similar dynamics between France and the United States in terms of the history of racial profiling and structural discrimination.
Staying inside is harder in neighborhoods like this one just outside Paris. No green spaces, cramped apartments, jobs lost or on the line, and still mouths to feed. This woman has 6 children. The effect of lockdown has been brutal.
Voilà, les gens ils ont attendu 11 pour sortir pour partir chercher la nourriture.
She's saying that when people haven't been able to go out under lockdown, they haven't been able to do their jobs. She's saying, who's paying these people? People here are hungry. Those who can go out to work are often the essential workers. But working means daily exposure, a reality that racks this young woman with worry for her family. Lamia thinks that the French government should be doing more to help essential workers in this country, many of them living in this neighbourhood. Lamia's father works in deliveries. He was given one mask to wear for an 8-hour shift, so instead Lamia's mother made the masks for him. The French government has allocated special aid to the country's poorest households. But the effect of poverty before the outbreak means more people here already have underlying health conditions. In the first week of April, the death rate in the Seine-Saint-Denis area exploded at 295% higher than the same time last year and 4 times higher than the national average during the current outbreak. The coronavirus pandemic is exposing the true extent of social and economic inequalities in France's banlieue, the country's most deprived neighbourhoods like this one. And now members of the community are taking matters into their own hands. Abdelali El Badawi is from these suburbs. He started out as a hospital cleaner, trained as a nurse, and has now founded an association helping those in the community he came from, handing out lockdown packages of food, toiletries and a mask. When we arrive in this neighbourhood, people call from the windows, desperate to know whether food is on its way. Scenes which are hard to watch and fathom, just a matter of miles from central Paris. Lockdown in France has already dealt a huge economic blow to all sections of society. Now it's revealing the true extent of disparities that existed long before coronavirus and could stand to worsen long after.
On Saturday, the Bundesliga, Germany's soccer league, will become the first major sports league in the Western world to restart play. But how will players be kept safe? And can German sports possibly serve as a model here in America? NBC News foreign correspondent Carl Nassman has a story.
Are you ready for some foosball?
It's been more than 2 months since we've had U.S. sports to keep us entertained.
Now the Bundesliga, Germany's top soccer league, has been given the green light to kick off once again.
Now that we're able to be back in training, see our teammates again, we're full of excitement.
Tyler Adams is a member of the U.S. men's national soccer team, and he plays here in Germany for RB Leipzig, one of the country's top clubs, and one of the first to get back on the pitch on Saturday. He and his teammates have spent the last week in quarantine as a precaution.
So we're actually at the training ground. We have the luxury of, having our own rooms. It's almost like a hotel at our training grounds.
It's just one of the hundreds of measures being rolled out by Germany's soccer body, the DFL, and German health authorities to try to keep players safe.
How the German officials, the politicians, the people on the boards, the doctors, everyone involved in this has just handled it in such a calm manner that, no one's nervous about it.
Strict health measures will be in effect before, during, and after matches, including socially distanced benches and goal celebrations. And testing will be crucial. Players and staff will be screened for COVID-19 regularly, including before matches. Tens of thousands of tests may be needed to finish the season.
And this is what stadiums will look like. No fans allowed inside. In fact, Germans, they've got the perfect word for this: Geisterspiele, or ghost games.
So our fans offer us so much momentum and energy going into games, but now we need to be able to encourage ourselves, our teammates, and find that extra motivation in order to win.
Only around 300 people will be allowed inside the stadiums, including players and essential staff. But at least one team's supporters have found a creative solution: these cardboard cutouts. Some 12,000 of them will fill the seats for Borussia Mönchengladbach. Even with all of these precautions, in the current environment, players simply can't be kept 100% safe.
We have to really begin to tolerate some amount of risk if we want to have some of these activities coming back. And there are going to be actions we can take to minimize them.
That risk was highlighted in just the last few weeks as at least 10 players in the top division tested positive for COVID-19. And an entire second division team is currently in quarantine after 2 of its players contracted the virus. That club will have to miss at least one match.
We're almost the guinea pigs in a sense. The way that Germany has handled the situation, they had their strict guidelines, people followed the rules, and I think that's why we're able to resume so quickly now.
Overall, Germany has been praised as a role model for its response to the pandemic. Could it now pave the way forward for other sports leagues around the world?
A lot of leagues and places around the world will probably look to us and say, yeah, they did it the right way.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gotti Schwartz in for Allison today, and you are watching NBC News Now. We're going to start our day by going to NBC News Now correspondent Alexa Lioto. She is following the very latest on the coronavirus headlines from NBCnews.com. Alexa, can you give us an update?
Sure. Hey, Gotti. We're starting off our headlines with some news out of the White House. President Trump today unveiling, quote, Operation Warp Speed. The project's goal is to fast track a coronavirus vaccine, which the president hopes to have by the end of the year.
When a vaccine is ready, the U.S. government will deploy every plane, truck, and soldier required to help distribute it to the American people as quickly as possible.
Yesterday, ousted Health and Human Services official Dr. Rick Bright said it could take 12 to 18 months to get a vaccine, quote, if everything goes perfectly. Now, moving on to the economy, U.S. retail sales fell by 16.4% in April to the lowest level on record, as many brick and mortar stores were closed during the coronavirus lockdowns. Now, according to CNBC's Patty Dahm, the monthly data is worse than expected, with economists having predicted a 12.3% drop instead. New York is joining its neighboring states in reopening beaches in time for Memorial Day weekend. Of course, certain restrictions will be in place. Social distancing will be mandatory. Organized games and sports are banned, and beaches will be required to operate at 50% capacity. Take a listen to New York Governor Andrew Cuomo a little earlier.
If New Jersey opens beaches or Connecticut opens beaches and we didn't open beaches, you would see a flood of people to Connecticut and New Jersey. It's not in our interest that people going to Connecticut beaches if those beaches are then going to be overcrowded.
Local governments will be able to decide whether to take part. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio also saying today, at least for New York City, it was, quote, not in the cards right now. And now from NBC's Adela Solomon, Wuhan, the Chinese city where coronavirus is believed to have originated, is pledging to test all 11 million residents for the virus to prevent a new wave of cases. The government of Hubei, the province where Wuhan is located, said on their website they would be using nucleic acid tests to screen for possible asymptomatic carriers to, quote, reassure the people of Wuhan and reassure the people across the country. Wuhan has now marked 1 month without any reported deaths from the disease. And lastly, new research is predicting nearly 250 million coronavirus cases in Africa. That's the latest from NBC's Isabel Van Hagen. A model by the World Health Organization's Regional Office for Africa estimates infections could occur in about 22% of Africa's population, with researchers urging, quote, effective containment measures. Africa has reported about 75,000 confirmed cases so far, according to the Africa Center for Disease Control. And those are the latest headlines for this hour. Gotti will be back a little later with more.
Can't wait. Thanks so much, Alexa.
You bet.
And you can visit our live blog at nbcnews.com/coronavirus for the very latest updates. New York State, the epicenter of the pandemic here in the U.S., as parts of the state begin the slow process of reopening in phases.
We're going to open half the regions
And you can visit our live blog at nbcnews.com/coronavirus for the very latest updates. New York State, the epicenter of the pandemic here in the U.S., as parts of the state begin the slow process of reopening in phases.
We're going to open half the regions